We turn our focus to Lebanon. While the rest of the world is under lockdown, in most parts, Lebanon is burning. More specifically, its northern city of Tripoli. Protests have erupted in Tripoli, one of Lebanon's poorest cities. The government imposed a 24-hour curfew to curb the virus surge. It's been 4 days now, and protesters do not seem to be backing down. They're outraged over the lockdown and failure of their government to improve their lot. They're suffering from the pandemic and the economic collapse, which has brought more than 50% of the people under the poverty line.
For the last 4 days, Lebanon's second largest city and its poorest has been in a state of chaos. Its streets have been taken over by its angry residents, and violence, tear gas and chants have become par for the course. Rioters even set several government buildings on fire. These unrelenting protests unfurl as the country grapples with not only a pandemic, but also the worst economic crisis in its history, with only a caretaker government in charge. The lockdown, which has been enforced since January the 11th and which will continue until the 8th of February, has only piled pressure on an already crippled economy. Protesters in Tripoli fear poverty more than the pandemic.
You want to close the country, provide people with what they need. It is not acceptable to lock people in their houses and leave them hungry. There are daily workers, there are people who were fired from their jobs. There are people who don't earn their living or even enough for the essentials of life.
I want to deliver a message to the politicians in Lebanon that they led the protesters here. If those protesters weren't hungry, they wouldn't have come here. If bread is not available to the poor, politicians won't be safe and we will protest every day. Our demands are to reopen shops and reduce a bit in the dollar exchange rate. People can't breathe anymore.
So far, one protester has been killed in the clashes and over 200 people left wounded. The death of 30-year-old Omar Taiba has only poured fuel on the fire. While Lebanese military troops have been deployed in the city, the people's frustrations have overcome any fear of military action. The confluence of these crises is poisoning the biggest threat to Lebanon's stability since the end of its civil war in 1990. More than half the population lives in poverty, while the state has promised aid to close to 300,000 families. It only amounts to less than $50 a month. Doctors fear that removing the lockdown will only lead to the collapse of the health system. The country has been struggling to bring its numbers down since August, and the Beirut port explosion only added to its woes. 200 people were killed, over 6,000 injured. Several hospitals and large parts of the city were destroyed. On top of this, politicians have not been able to agree on a new government. The last one quit in the aftermath of the Beirut port blast. Public anger has now erupted into protests. And with more families struggling to meet basic needs, it looks like Lebanon is staring at a catastrophe in the coming days. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.